There's something powerful that happens when you finally walk away, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in quiet certainty. The kind of certainty that says, I deserved more than this. In the moment, he might not notice. He might assume you'll come back, that your love will keep showing up even if he doesn't, but time has a way of making truth louder. And as you begin to rebuild, to glow, to reclaim your peace, something shifts. That's when he starts to feel it. Not just your absence, but the weight of what he lost. This isn't about revenge. It's not about hoping he suffers. It's about understanding that the most powerful kind of regret isn't created by punishment. It's created by evolution. When you grow beyond the version of yourself that tolerated less than you deserved, he can't help but look back and wonder how he let someone like you slip through his hands. Now he regrets losing you, not because you made him, but because you became someone who no longer needed him to feel whole. When you were with him, there was a part of you that was constantly performing, maybe not in the dramatic sense, but in the subtle ways that add up. You filtered your words to avoid conflict. You suppressed your needs to seem cool and easygoing. You made yourself more available than you wanted to be because you were afraid of seeming distant. You were careful with your emotions, walking that line between being affectionate and not too much. All of that wasn't really you. It was a version of you shaped by the fear of being too hard to love. And what hurts most is he didn't even realize how much energy that took from you. But something happened when you stopped, when you hit that emotional wall, not with anger, but with exhaustion. You weren't trying to prove anything anymore. You weren't trying to be more lovable. You just let go of the act. You stopped calling to keep the connection alive. You stopped checking in when he pulled away. You stopped overthinking every word you sent or every silence that followed. That was the moment the dynamic changed. What he didn't realize until then was how much you were holding the relationship together. He thought things just flowed naturally. But it wasn't natural. It was effort. It was you constantly shaping yourself to fit the mold of what you thought he wanted. And when that stopped, he was left with the raw silence of someone who was no longer bending. And that silence spoke volumes. It's in that space that he finally saw the real you, not the polished, agreeable, emotionally generous version that he got used to, but the woman who knows she has nothing to prove. The one who realized that love isn't about managing another person's emotions or sacrificing your own. The woman who finally asked herself, what do I need? Instead of constantly wondering what he wanted. And the truth is, the real you was always the prize. But while you were performing, he couldn't fully see that. He saw convenience, he saw attention, he saw affection, but he didn't see the depth behind all of it. Because he never had to ask what you needed. He never had to rise to meet you. He never had to question whether you'd stay. When you stopped performing, the weight shifted. Suddenly he wasn't being catered to. He wasn't being reassured. He had to ask himself whether he had something to offer, not just what he could take. And in that moment, he saw how much of your value he had taken for granted. Not just your time or your effort, but the emotional labor you carried in the relationship. The kind he thought was just who you are, but was actually who you became to keep things going. That realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly. Maybe when he scrolls through an old photo. Maybe when he sees your name light up in his messages and realizes you haven't reached out. Maybe when someone else enters his life and she doesn't have the same warmth, the same thoughtfulness, the same ability to listen deeply or support without judgment. That's when he starts to feel it. Not your presence, but the lack of it. The gap where your emotional support used to be. The comfort of knowing you were always there, now gone. And regret isn't always about wanting you back. Sometimes it's about recognizing too late what he had when he had it. It's about understanding that the version of you he saw wasn't all of you, and that the real, grounded, fully expressed version was always waiting underneath. He just wasn't ready to meet her. But you were. And when you stopped performing, you didn't just walk away from him. You walked toward yourself. You found your strength, not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself. And that's what he regrets most. Not just that he lost you, but that he never really saw you until it was too late. There's a moment after the ending of a relationship where silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. It's the space where you used to reach out, where you used to fill the void with a text, a call, an "I miss you," or a subtle attempt to reconnect. But this time, you didn't. You chose silence, not as a tactic, not to manipulate, but because you were finally done chasing closure from someone who never offered clarity. And in that silence, something powerful began to happen, not just for you, but for him. He started to wonder, because the silence you created wasn't bitter or cold, it was calm. It didn't scream, it whispered. It whispered, "I've accepted this." And that's the kind of silence that unnerves someone who's used to being able to push your buttons, who's used to you still caring, even after it's over. When someone is used to you always being the one to extend the olive branch, to reopen the door, to check in, they don't know what to do when that pattern breaks. It forces them to sit with themselves, and for the first time, to feel the absence they never thought they'd have to face. The absence doesn't just highlight your physical distance, it exposes the emotional investment they took for granted. Every time he goes to check his phone and doesn't see your name, every time he wonders what you're doing and realizes he no longer has access to you, a new kind of discomfort sets in. One that isn't about anger or pride, but about loss. Not just losing someone he used to talk to, but someone who genuinely cared. Someone who made him feel seen in a way he didn't even fully appreciate when he had it. That silence becomes a mirror. It reflects the imbalance. All the times you reached out first, all the times you apologized when you weren't wrong, all the times you swallowed your hurt just to keep the peace. Now, in your absence, those moments start to pile up in his memory. Not because you reminded him, but because now there's nothing left to distract him from what he missed. And regret isn't born from being pushed. It's born from contrast. The contrast between the consistency you offered and the quiet you've now chosen. The contrast between how safe he felt in your presence and how lost he feels in your absence. The most impactful thing you did wasn't begging for answers. It was not needing any. You didn't post quotes about healing or heartbreak to hint at your pain. You simply moved forward. You poured into your life. You focused on things that made you feel strong, loved, grounded. And even if you missed him, you didn't let that dictate your next move. Because there's a difference between feeling something and acting on it. You felt it. You just didn't let it pull you back to a place where your needs were overlooked. That's the version of you he regrets losing. The one who didn't need to scream to be heard. The one who spoke volumes with stillness. The one who didn't burn bridges or write long, dramatic messages explaining her worth. You didn't try to teach him a lesson. You just became one. And lessons delivered through silence have a way of echoing longer than any argument ever could. This wasn't about ignoring him to win. It was about honoring yourself enough not to reopen wounds that were never going to be healed by the person who caused them. It was about choosing your peace over temporary validation. It was about knowing that your energy is valuable, and someone who constantly made you question your place in their life doesn't deserve to know where they stand in yours. That's when the regret begins to grow, when he starts to recognize the luxury of being in your life was never guaranteed, that access to you wasn't a given, it was earned. And once he lost that, once he saw you not as someone waiting for him to come back, but as someone who built a life that didn't include him at all, that's when the full weight of the loss hit. Because silence wasn't emptiness, it was evolution. It was you choosing to heal without needing him to know how far you'd come. There's a specific moment that hits different when someone realizes they've lost someone who leveled up after the breakup. It's not about revenge or trying to make him jealous. It's about the undeniable glow that comes from healing. When you shift your energy away from him and redirect it into yourself, something remarkable happens. You stop orbiting his world and become the center of your own. And even if he's not watching closely, he feels the shift, because energy doesn't lie. You're no longer moving from a place of lack or needing answers. You're moving with purpose, clarity, and self-respect. That transformation starts small. It's in the morning you wake up and don't check your phone hoping for a message. It's in the way you fill your time with things that make you feel alive, instead of replaying conversations that made you feel confused. You start investing in the friendships that energize you. You pick up that project you've been putting off. You treat yourself kindly, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you finally understand your worth doesn't depend on anyone else seeing it. And without even meaning to, you begin to radiate a new kind of confidence, one rooted in ownership. You're not looking to be chosen anymore. You're choosing yourself. And that's when it starts to get to him. At first it's subtle, a passing curiosity. He sees a post or hears about you from a mutual friend and realizes you're not where he left you. Emotionally, mentally, even physically, you're in a different space. You look lighter, freer, and that contrast hits harder than any words you could have sent. Because it's easy to pretend someone doesn't matter when they're still hurting, still reaching, still clinging to what could have been. But it's another story when they've clearly outgrown the chapter you left them in. What people don't always realize is that regret doesn't come from watching you suffer, it comes from watching you thrive without them. When he sees that your joy no longer includes him, that your life is expanding while he's still cycling through old patterns, the regret starts to settle in. Not just because he misses you, but because now he has to reckon with the fact that he lost someone who didn't just love him, someone who had the potential to grow with him, to build something real, and he let that go. This is when he replays things in his head, the moments where he didn't show up, the ways he dismissed your concerns, the times he took your consistency for granted. And now that he's watching from the outside, he's starting to understand the value of what he lost. You're no longer the same person who would have settled for crumbs. You're the woman who realized she deserved the whole damn table and started building it herself. That evolution isn't for him, though. That's the key. You didn't become stronger, happier, and more fulfilled to make him feel bad. You did it because you finally saw the pattern. Shrinking yourself to fit into someone's limited capacity only leaves you empty. And when you stopped doing that, everything began to shift. You stopped waiting, you stopped explaining, you stopped hoping for change from someone who showed you who he was too many times. And in walking away, not just physically, but emotionally, you created space for your actual life to begin. This kind of growth doesn't always look flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, even invisible to others. But the effects ripple. It's in how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you no longer entertain half-hearted effort. And that change is deeply unsettling for someone who expected you to stay stuck. Because when he sees that you're not the same, he realizes the version of you he once had access to doesn't exist anymore. And the worst kind of regret is the kind that's permanent, the kind where you know deep down that you can't go back to what was, because that version of her doesn't live here anymore. This is the kind of regret that makes someone scroll through old messages at 2 a.m., the kind that brings a pit to his stomach when your name comes up, not because you're unreachable, but because the door is closed, and not out of spite, but out of growth. You didn't block him, you didn't post revenge photos, you just moved on with grace. And that's the loudest message of all, because nothing is more attractive and more haunting than someone who once loved you deeply, then realized they could love themselves more. There's a powerful shift that happens when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop chasing closure, when you no longer feel the need to make him understand how deeply he hurt you or how much you were willing to give. There's a strange kind of freedom that arrives when you stop handing over your energy to someone who never truly honored it in the first place. It's the moment you decide that your peace is worth more than your need to be understood. That's when he starts to feel the real weight of losing you, because the silence you leave behind says more than any final speech ever could. When you were with him, you probably poured yourself out in ways he never even noticed. You were there in his low moments. You celebrated his wins like they were your own. You tried to make it work even when the effort wasn't mutual. You stayed in conversations that felt like brick walls. You explained your needs again and again, hoping this time he'd really hear you. But over time, those explanations became exhausting. You started realizing you weren't in a relationship, you were in a loop. One where you were constantly trying to get through to someone who didn't want to meet you halfway. And the irony is, when you finally stop trying to be heard, that's when they start listening. Not because they've suddenly become more emotionally available, but because now they're forced to sit with your absence. They're no longer distracted by your voice, your arguments, your reminders. Now there's just space. And space is powerful. It gives people the room to feel the void you used to fill, not just with your presence, but with your understanding, your patience, your love. In that silence, he starts to realize how loud your presence actually was. He remembers the way you used to check in, the way you cared about the little things, the way you tried to bridge the distance between you two, even when you felt like you were building that bridge alone. He begins to see how much emotional labor you were doing, and how easy it was to take that for granted, because when someone is always there, always showing up, always explaining, it becomes easy to stop valuing it. It becomes expected, but when it's gone, it becomes undeniable. And this isn't about manipulation. It's not about giving the silent treatment or punishing him. It's about reclaiming your energy. It's about no longer trying to convince someone of your worth, because the moment you start defending your worth to someone who doesn't see it, you've already started to lose yourself, and you're not doing that anymore. You're done breaking yourself down into digestible pieces so someone else can feel comfortable. You're done explaining basic decency like it's a complex ask. You're done hoping he'll wake up if you just find the right words. The truth is, the right person never needs to be convinced. They don't make you plead for attention. They don't need a thesis on why your feelings matter. They just show up and keep showing up. And when you start honoring that truth, everything shifts. You no longer waste your time trying to make someone see you when they've already chosen not to. You stop trying to rewrite a story that's already ended. Instead, you begin writing a new one where your voice isn't used to beg for love, but to build your own life. And it's in that quiet rebuilding that the regret creeps in for him, because now he's no longer distracted by the noise of your efforts. He's left with himself, his patterns, his dismissiveness, his inability to appreciate what he had when he had it. And as much as he might try to distract himself, it's there, in the empty inbox, in the unreturned call, in the fact that for the first time you're not coming back with one more try. You've made peace with the lack of closure, because you gave yourself the closure he never could. And that's the part he didn't see coming, that you would stop fighting for him, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, that you would walk away with your dignity intact without needing to prove anything, that you would get quiet, not because you had nothing left to say, but because you finally understood that the most powerful thing you could do was to say nothing at all. There's something magnetic about someone who chooses their own life over chasing validation. When you begin to fall back in love with your own world, your routines, your passions, your friends, your future, it sends a message louder than any text you could send or speech you could give. It says, I am the source of my own joy. And when a man sees that, especially one who let you go, he starts to question everything. Not because you said anything, not because you tried to make him jealous, but because he suddenly sees you thriving without him. And that realization hits in a way that words never could. At first he might not notice, maybe he thinks you'll reach out, maybe he assumes you're still stuck on him, because that's what he's used to. Maybe in the past, when he pulled away, you chased, you clarified, you tried to fix what was broken, you filled in the silence with effort. But this time is different. You didn't rage, you didn't beg, you just moved on. And not in a passive-aggressive, I'm going to make you regret this kind of way. In a real, authentic, grounded way. You stopped centering your life around what he was doing, saying, or feeling. You took your energy back and redirected it into the parts of you that you had been neglecting while trying to make things work. That shift doesn't just heal you, it unsettles him. Because people notice when their absence doesn't collapse your world, especially people who once thought they were the center of it. He sees the photos of you smiling with friends. He hears through mutuals that you're busy again, lit up by something new. Maybe it's a project, a fitness goal, a trip, something that doesn't involve him. And while he might not admit it out loud, there's a pang there, a sudden awareness that the role he once played is no longer vacant. Not because someone else has taken it, but because you stopped needing someone to fill it. And that's what's truly powerful, that your glow up wasn't about replacing him, it was about reclaiming yourself, your time, your peace, your identity, the parts of you that were dimmed because you were trying to be easy to love, the pieces you bent or quieted because you didn't want to come off as too much. And now You're no longer living in response to his attention. You're not checking your phone hoping to see his name. You're not replaying conversations trying to find the moment it all shifted. You're present again in your own life. And that's rare. That's attractive. That's the kind of energy people circle back to and wonder how they ever let slip away. Regret doesn't always show up in a grand gesture. Sometimes it's in the way he lingers on your story longer than he should, the way he double taps your post without following up, the way he suddenly reaches out with a, "Hey, how have you been?" that tries to sound casual but carries the weight of curiosity and uncertainty. He wants to know, is there still a door open? Have you been thinking about him too? But here's the thing, whether or not you choose to engage isn't the point. The point is he's now feeling something you already worked through. While he was living in the comfort of your availability, you were doing the hard work of detaching. And now, from this distance, he sees what he couldn't before, that you were never just a comforting presence. You were never just an option he could revisit when life got lonely. You were the person who showed up, who cared deeply, who brought warmth and intention to the relationship. And the version of you he remembers is no longer waiting in the wings. You've evolved. And that evolution didn't come from him coming back. It came from you choosing to move forward. So yes, he regrets it. Maybe quietly, maybe deeply, maybe too late. But the beauty is, his regret is no longer your responsibility. You're not seeking revenge or closure or validation. You're simply living, loving your own company, building a life that feels good on the inside, not just one that looks good from the outside. And when someone loses access to that kind of energy, not because it was taken from them, but because they didn't know how to hold it, it leaves a realization that what they lost wasn't replaceable. It was rare, and now it's gone. Sometimes the deepest regret comes not from what was said or done, but from what was never fully understood. The value of losing someone who truly mattered. When he realizes that you've moved on, that you're no longer waiting for his calls or messages, that you've rebuilt your life without him in the starring role, it triggers a reckoning. It's the moment he faces the quiet truth. What he had was rare, and he let it slip through his fingers. But regret is complicated. It's not just about missing you. It's about missing the potential, the future he could have built, the partnership he took for granted, the unique connection that was once effortless and now feels impossibly out of reach. This kind of regret isn't just a fleeting pang of loneliness. It's the slow burn of understanding the gap between what was and what could have been. When you were there, he might not have recognized your worth. Maybe he took your kindness for granted, or he assumed you'd always be around. Maybe he thought that if he wasn't ready or willing to show up fully, you would still wait. But the moment you decided to stop waiting, that moment when you put yourself first and began creating a life that didn't need his validation, everything shifted. He's now forced to confront a version of you that's thriving independently, and that's a hard pill to swallow. Regret in this context often comes with a heavy dose of self-reflection for him. He starts to question his choices, wondering why he didn't fight harder or why he let fear or complacency get in the way. It's the kind of regret that makes someone look inward, and sometimes that kind of awareness is the most painful of all. It can be a catalyst for growth, but only if he's willing to acknowledge what he lost, rather than blaming external circumstances or the timing. It's about recognizing that the person you were and the person you've become was someone worth holding on to, and that his failure to do so wasn't about luck, but about his own actions. On your side, this kind of regret gives you power, but it doesn't come from rubbing it in or seeking to punish him. Instead, it's about standing firm in the truth of your own worth. You no longer need his recognition or approval to feel complete. Your growth and your peace are proof that you were never the problem, and that sometimes the right person is simply the one who chooses to stay. His regret is a reflection of what was lost because he didn't see or appreciate it when he had the chance. Regret is a reflection of what was lost because he didn't see or appreciate it when he had. This realization also brings clarity about the kind of relationship you want moving forward. When someone truly regrets losing you, it's because they understood the depth of what you gave and the standards you upheld. They recognize that love isn't just about convenience or comfort, it's about respect, effort, and reciprocity. And when those things were missing, it became clear to you, and now to him, that settling for less was never an option. You've set the bar high because you know what you deserve, and that boundary is what makes you magnetic and untouchable in the best way. The power of this regret also lies in how it shifts the dynamic between you two. You're no longer chasing, apologizing, or explaining yourself. Instead, you're operating from a place of calm confidence. You understand that the past is a closed chapter and that any future connection depends on mutual respect and genuine effort. If he wants to come back, it has to be because he's willing to meet you where you are, not because he's trying to fix a mistake or fill a void. That's a profound shift because it means your energy is protected and your emotional well-being is non-negotiable. Moreover, his regret often shines a light on the lessons he might carry forward. When someone truly loses a rare connection, it can inspire them to grow, to change their approach to relationships, and to become more aware of what it means to cherish and nurture a partnership. Whether or not that growth includes you, it speaks to the impact you made simply by being yourself and refusing to settle for anything less than authentic love. At the end of the day, the regret he feels isn't a tool for you to wield. It's a natural consequence of your strength and your refusal to be anyone's second choice or fallback option. Your decision to honor yourself, to love yourself fiercely, and to live fully without him is the true source of his regret. And that kind of regret is powerful because it doesn't come from control or manipulation. It comes from the undeniable truth that what you offered was precious and that losing it was his loss alone. In the end, his regret is not about winning you back. It's about realizing the depth of what he lost because you chose yourself first. Your strength, your self-respect, and your refusal to settle set a standard that he couldn't meet. And that's where true power lies. When you stop chasing and start honoring your worth, you don't just free yourself, you create space for the kind of love that matches your value. Remember, the right person won't make you question your worth or your peace. They'll hold on tightly because they see you as the gift you are. So keep walking forward with confidence, knowing that letting go was never a loss for you. It was the moment you took back your power.